Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Angelica and this little dog here is Vitra. And in today's video I will talk a little bit about watercolor art supplies for you as a beginner. And I decided to make a little bit of a series because the current situation around the world with COVID, and soon it will be December and Christmas, and some people will be a little bit more alone than before. So I decided that throughout December I will make a tutorial for each week up until the same week as Christmas. So you can either follow them along and create the same thing that I do, or you can just have them on as company when you create something for yourself. So, but because I decided to make tutorials for beginner, I also wanted to make a couple of videos with art supplies for you as a beginner. And yes, I see you, Vitra. I see you. So in this video it will be about a little bit about paper and brushes and a little bit of other things, and in my next video I will talk about watercolor and watercolor sets, because if I have talk about that in this video would have been very long. So I save that to the next video, and that video will be up either on Thursday or Friday this week. And if you don't want to miss out, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell, so then you won't miss it. And the first tutorial will be uploaded next Tuesday, and it will be this, if you can see that. It's a blue tit, or a Eurasian blue tit. Don't lick that, please. And the second one will be this snowman. So I hope you will follow me along on those tutorials, and it will be 2 more, which I haven't filmed yet, so but they will come, I promise you that. So with that being said, let's start and go through some art supplies for you as a beginner. So when you are a beginner at watercolor, what do you really need? The simple answer is that you need some watercolor paper, some brush that are made to be used with watercolor, and of course some watercolors and some water. And then you are good to go. But when you are a beginner it can be quite difficult to know which paper, which brushes and which watercolor and other materials you really need. So in this video I'm going to show you what have worked for me. I was a beginner for like 2.5 years ago, and for like 10 years ago I started my first attempt at watercolors, but it never worked for me because I didn't have a good paper, I didn't have good brushes, and I wasn't so sure how to use watercolors. Back 2.5 years ago when I tried watercolors again, this time it did go much better, because then I have got some knowledge through YouTube on what paper and brushes and colors to use. So now I want to share my knowledge and what have worked good for me to you, so that you get a little bit wiser perhaps, or maybe get some tips that you didn't know. So let's start. So the most important thing, and the thing that you need to put down most money on, the most expensive item, is the paper. For me, I started with these two that are very cheap, and there are no cotton in them, and they are not so heavy. This bigger one is Canson Montval 200 GSM. This other one is, I do believe it's a Swedish brand, Decorima, that are 180 grams. So, and they are quite thin paper. So this one I don't recommend at all. They are worthless. Do not waste your money on them. Instead, buy a little bit expensive paper. And I have two different brands here. I have Arches and Canson. Canson Heritage, to be more precise. And both are 100% cotton and 300 GSM. So they are both very good. A little bit expensive, especially Arches are, I think, most expensive. But they are so worth it. And you have two alternatives, or maybe you have three, but these are the two alternatives I use. One is hot pressed and one is cold pressed. Cold pressed has a more texture to it. Hopefully you can see, or you cannot see. And hot pressed, sorry, mix them together, have a more fine texture. I will try to zoom you in here. You might can see that this has a more texture. Maybe if I shadow it, you see, and the other one has not any texture. So these are the main difference with the hot pressed and cold pressed, the texture. And also the cold pressed are a little bit thicker paper, and it can take more water. And I do believe it's better when you lift colors also. So it's mostly recommended for beginners rather than hot pressed. But for me, I had quite a hard time with the cold pressed, but the hot pressed worked very well for me. So if you can afford it, I would recommend you to buy one of each and try them out. And if you can't afford both, buy cold pressed to begin with. And a tip, because the paper is quite expensive, don't buy a small pad. Buy a large one and cut it in small pieces, because when you do this, larger pad is more often cheaper per paper than a small pad. And if you could cut it in small pieces, you have a better size for you to work on when you start with watercolors. And you can also cut it in half once more, so you got 4 little pieces of sheets from one big. So there's a tip. So here are the Canson. The yellow one is cold pressed and the red one is hot pressed. And for Arches, the cold pressed are green and the hot pressed are pink. And my favorite is Arches. For me it works the best, but Canson is not so bad either. And I know that there are other brands with watercolor papers that also are 100% cotton and 300 GSM. So if you find an alternative that are cheaper for you, I suggest you buy it. But yeah, 100% cotton and 300 GSM, have that in mind. As a beginner you don't need 640 GSM, I think it's the larger or thicker size, but do not go under 300 GSM. trust me, don't. So yeah, that's the paper. Buy some better quality and not some cheap quality. Trust me. And after paper, there are brushes. So here I have a variety. Most are synthetic and also two mixed brushes mixed with they are mixed with synthetic and squirrel. So you don't need to put down as much money for the brushes as for the paper, but still you don't want to get the most cheapest brushes you can get. And what I recommend is that you start with synthetic. I try to start with the squirrel and another hair brush. I can't remember what sort of hair, or I can't remember its name in English rather, but yeah, they didn't work at all for me. Particularly with squirrel, it takes quite a lot of water, and that can be very hard for a beginner to handle. And synthetic brushes don't take up as much water. So I move these two aside for a moment. So I have two types of Daler Rowney brushes here. This one is Aquafine, that are specially made for watercolors, and the other one is Graduate, and I don't know if it's meant for a particularly medium, but for me, when I started to use this Graduate brushes for watercolor, I started to handle the watercolor much better than I have done before. So these are two different brushes that are both good. I can't remember the price of these Aquafines. I have in mind that they are a little bit expensive than the other ones, but I can't really recall. These ones, the Graduate ones, cost me about $3 each, so they are not so expensive. But then we can talk a little bit about which sizes you need. This big one I only use if I need to add a lot of water to the paper, so I barely use it otherwise because I don't paint on such large areas. And here you have a teeny tiny little brush that can be good for small details, but when you start out you need, oops, they run away from me, you need a smaller one, a 1 or perhaps a 2, and then a 4, and then it depends on if you want to paint big or small, but either a 6 or a 10. So maybe this 3 or maybe this 3. You don't need more than 3 brushes to begin with, just have a good variety of sizes. And when it comes to watercolor, you tend to use more round brushes than flat brushes in your work. And when you have done watercolor for a while, I recommend that you change up your game to these mix brushes. So these are mixed, as I said, between synthetic and squirrel, and they are a little bit more expensive. I can't really remember how much I paid for them, but I do believe this small one, which are a size 2, cost about $8, and this in a size 4 maybe $12, so they aren't cheap, but they are very good, and I use them for most of my watercolor works today. So yeah, that's the brushes. So 3 round ones are a good start point. So I think the biggest question for any beginner is which watercolor should you buy? Because there are a huge variety of them out there. And here I have 4 different watercolor sets. We have Winsor & Newton Cotman, Schminka, I do believe it's Academy or they student grade. And we have White Nights and Kuretake Gansa Tambi. And I will not go so much in depth about these 4 watercolor sets in this video, because in my next video I will go through these 4 sets more in depth. So make sure to keep an eye out for that video. That will be up and running later this week. But an important thing is that you buy a student grade set when you are a beginner and not something like this. This was actually my first watercolor set that I never learned to use, and the colors are quite chalky and quite hard to wet. I feel like there are an upgrade from children's watercolors. So if you want to do more like professional watercolors later on, start with a nicer set than this. Just a tip there. Still today I don't like them, not at all. So even though these are quite cheap compared to these ones, but they don't have any pigment information and not even names on the colors, so yeah. And a big question when you are a beginner are which kind of set should you buy, how many colors should you buy. And the thing is, you can get quite far with only a few colors, but weirdly enough for me, I learned how to color mix properly with this large set. These are 40 colors but 45 pans, because some of them are duplicates. But since I learned to mix watercolors with this, I have barely used it, and I started to learn how to mix and use a smaller set like this with 9 colors. But as I said, I will go through these colors more in depth in the next video. But one thing I like to mention in this video is that it is very important that you do some kind of color chart or color swatches when you buy the colors. And here you can see a couple of mine. The first one that I did proper color swatches of. And you can see I have the color name, the pigment information, and the light fastness rating. Now when you are a beginner, you don't really care about the light fastness, and you don't feel the need to know so much about the pigment information. At least that was the case for me, and I do believe I'm not alone in that. But just to put down the colors and write the color names and write them as they lay in your pan. I can take this schminka again and show you what I mean. Here I have the color chart, and as you can see, this yellow are here and this here and so on, just the same way as they lie in their palette. So you keep an eye out for that, because if you don't, it can go like it did go for me when I did this big swatch of Winsor & Newton, of White Nights. Here I have to change the name because I have mixed raw sienna and yellow ochre. I have to wonder if this one was correct, because it, when I looked on pictures on the internet, it didn't look correct. And also I have mixed up Mars Brown and Burnt Umber. I think I have them properly now, but I'm not 100% sure. And another color that I'm a little bit confused at are this quinacridone, because I made this first. Here you can see I have wrote it down quinacridone lilac, but here it looked like quinacridone rose, so I'm not quite sure. So just do some kind of color swatches of how the colors lie in the pan, just so you know, so you don't mix them up with each other. So there's a tip there for you to bear in mind. And you will see me swatch out these Gansas Hamby colors at the end of this video, so you can see how you can swatch out colors. So stay tuned for that, if you can put it that way. Another thing I can recommend you to check out if you are a beginner are watercolor pencils. So they are a little bit easier to handle than regular watercolors. And yeah, these are by Derwent, and this is an old package, if you don't recognize it. So I bought this perhaps 10 years or so ago. So the thing that you do with these pencils is just to put down a layer like this, and then you have some water and a brush. Dip the brush in water and put the brushes and just blend the colors out. Maybe I need some more water for that. So you can see, maybe hang on a moment, I will zoom you in so that you can see. Otherwise it's not so good. We can try with a blue color. And some water. You don't want to use too much water because it will water down the colors too much, but if you don't have enough, you will not activate the pigment. So the thing is with the pencils, as you can see the pen strokes after it has dried. So that's the big difference, and maybe that can depend on which brand of pencils or which brand of watercolor papers. So yeah, and since the color have dried, you can put down another layer with a pencil in which color you need, and then do the same thing. So that's technically how you do it. Now I didn't show you quite as well, but I don't use the watercolor pencils so much nowadays. But yeah, that's how you use them. And you can also let's take a purple and some water on the brush, and you can see me do this, but I stroke the brush on the edge of the glass and dip it sometimes to get out the colors from the brush, so that it's clear water. And you can also do this, and you get pigments that way from the pen. If you have seen my video where I did a painting in water-soluble graphite, it's the same technique like with watercolor pencils. So yeah, that's also a thing for you as a beginner to think about, that maybe watercolor pencils will work better for you than watercolors. So yeah, that's an option. And now we have come to the part with the different things you need for watercoloring. Technically you don't need all of those things if you don't want to, but I thought that I would show you anyway. And you might have seen some of this if you have seen my video with my watercolor art supplies, but these are good tips, so I thought I would show you them again. So let's start with palettes. If you buy a watercolor set like this, you don't really need a palette because you can mix your colors here. But if you for some reason buy a watercolor set with no palette, then something like this would do. These are quite a cheap plastic palette. Or you can use a porcelain plate if you have some old lying around. The only thing with this is that water and color travels. So I suggest one color for this outer part of the plate and one color for this inner part. And this looks quite dirty, and it's because I've used it for ink. Just so you know, if you wonder. So these are two options for palettes that aren't so expensive. And some old towel. I use this to wipe off the brush from excess water or excess paint. So if you have an old towel lying around, I would recommend you that you use it for this rather than throw it away. And I also use another towel to put my water jars or glasses on. So here is a jar that there have been some kind of food in, so that's perfect use for water. Or as I showed you earlier, words are quite hard, I have been talking for quite some while now. This is a glass, an old glass that wasn't so good to drink out. I do believe that the ears, this glass or mug rather, could fall off. So I won't want to drink out of it, but it's perfect for water. So I will remove this and this, many things now, and some scrap pieces of watercolor paper, because when you paint and you mix colors, you will want to see how they look before you put them on your painting. So scrap pieces of watercolor paper are perfect for that. So that's a tip for you. And then something that is very good if you are going to use a lot of water is to tape down the paper so that the paper don't buckle up so much. And if you have small sheets of paper, you might have some plastic lid lying around or something flat that don't pull in the water. So, and you just tape down the paper. Or you can use a wood board, and this pulls in some water and color, but not, not too much. So these are quite good. And you can see this is 30 by 40 centimeters. This was made to be used for some other stuff, but it worked perfectly for watercolor papers in A4 size, and I do believe it's 9 by 12 inches also it works well for. And for the tape I just use a masking tape. This is from a Swedish company, Clas Ohlson, and for me this brand had worked the best because it don't stick so hard to the paper, but it sticks well enough to stick down the paper to the board. So, but when you are a beginner, you don't really need this as a start. You can just have the paper lying flat and maybe put some heavy stuffs in the corner or something to keep it down. But masking tape aren't so expensive, and just check your home for what you have lying around. You just need a flat surface to tape the paper down on. So that's some things you might need, and also one other thing, a hair dryer. And this is a good tool for when you need to dry the paper fast, if you can't wait to work on the next layer. So then you need a hair dryer, or need, but if you want it to go faster. And if you are a woman with long hair, you might already have a hair dryer at home, so you can just use that instead of buying some only for the watercolors. So that's just a little tip, not something you necessarily need, and not worth to put down money on when you're starting, if you don't already have it. So that are some different things that can be quite nice to have when you start out with watercolors. So the last art supplies that I want to show you for a beginner is how you can use white in watercolors, because when you buy some sets of watercolors it contains a white, but that white doesn't go over other colors and stay white. You can use that white if you want to do pastel colors, but not as, like, if you want to have light highlights in the eyes, you can't use it. So here are the things you can use for preserving the white or adding white. So here we have a masking fluid by Winsor & Newton, and you can use a brush, a regular brush, or this silicone brush to put it down on the paper. And if you use a regular brush, you need to clean it quite fast after you have used it, because otherwise you will ruin your brush. So I have always used a silicone brush for this, but with this I can't get some really fine lines, and it is quite messy to use, so I don't use it so often. The thing you do with this, you add it to the paper, you wait for it to dry, and then you can paint over it. But the thing is, you have to make sure that you have added it quite well, otherwise colors can come under it if you don't have, like, you know, an even layer to it. So that's an option for you. And here another option for masking fluid. This is Molotov, and this is actually a pencil, and I do believe that you can get it with a finer nib. So with this one you shake it and you pull it down on the paper, and also with this you need for it to dry before you can paint over it. And I do believe for both of them you can only let it stay on the paper for like a few days or so. There are instructions on the packages, so be sure to read them before you use them. But after I bought this, I do believe I have used it once, and afterwards I saw on Facebook someone that had used it, and afterwards the paper got a blue tone. So that is not so good. But it's easy to use if you are a beginner. So that's something you can use, but just beware, it can color off. And the last thing that I use the most is this Gouache by Winsor & Newton. This is a designer's gouache, permanent white. So I add this for highlight in the eyes, and it works very, very well. So I can really recommend that you buy a tube of this, just to have handy for when you need some white highlights. So yeah, that's all the art supplies that can be useful for you as a beginner to know of. So let's start with the color swatches of the Ganza Tamei. So let's start to unbox the Ganza Tamei set in 24 colors. So it comes in this paper box, and you also get a paper with the different colors that it contains. And also here you have a plastic thing on top of the pens. So here are all the 24 pens, and they look so gorgeous. It's always fun with new colors. It's always something special to open it up. And they are very beautiful and vibrant colors in this set. And here you can see that I swatched them out after how they lay in their package, so that I know which color are which. And you will see at the end that I put their name down on the paper also, so that I know that information. And the colors that this set contains are red, rose madder, rose madder deep, cadmium scarlet, cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, yellow ochre, olive green, sap green light, sap green, hooker's green, sap green deep, viridian, turquoise green deep, malachite, I think it's pronounced malachite, ultramarine pale, ultramarine, turquoise blue, indigo, cobalt violet, burnt sienna, raw umber deep, and black. And for me this set contains too many greens and not enough blues. And you also got an ultramarine pale and a regular ultramarine, which I find a little bit confusing, because if you want a little bit paler ultramarine you can just use more water when you paint with it, so that doesn't make so much sense to me. But if you like to use a lot of greens, so then this is a set for you. And the colors were very easy to use and to get out of the pans. So no problems there. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the other videos for you as a beginner. So next video is about 4 watercolor sets, and then it will be some videos with beginner tutorials. So you don't want to miss that. So subscribe and hit the notification bell, and then you will be notified when I put out new videos. And I hope you have enjoyed this video and have some better knowledge of what watercolor art supplies you should get as a beginner. And here you can see all the colors dried up in the correct order and with the names on it. So I really recommend that you do this with every watercolor set that you get, so you don't mix them in some way or another. So thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that I will see you in my next video. So bye!